I can find 100 women like you. The words fell into the south drawing-room at Falconhurst Park with such quiet precision that Catherine Ellingford heard the coal settle in the grate. Beyond the tall windows, the Dorset sky hung low and silver over the lawns. Inside, every polished surface reflected firelight, rank, and the stillness of people who had just witnessed a cruelty too elegant to name aloud. Ambrose Caversham, Duke of Norchester, stood near the window with one hand behind his back. He did not look angry. That made the sentence worse. Anger might have passed. This had the cold shape of a conclusion. Lady Millicent Rowley sat beside the marble mantel in pale blue silk, her gloved fingers resting upon the carved handle of her fan. Sir Alton Pierce stared into his wine-glass. Lady Pierce lowered her eyes. They had all known why Catherine had spent the past week at Falconhurst. The Dowager Duchess had invited her under the courteous pretense of autumn companionship, but no woman of 33 with a modest annuity and no powerful male guardian could mistake such an invitation. Catherine had been observed at breakfast, on walks, during estate dinners, and beside the Dowager Duchess's chair. Her composure had been measured. Her judgment had been tested. Her willingness to become Duchess of Norchester had been treated as the final unanswered question. Catherine had believed the week might reveal whether mutual esteem could grow between two sensible adults. She had not expected romance. She had expected respect. 100, she repeated. Her voice did not tremble. Ambrose's expression altered. That isn't what I intended to say. It is exactly what you intended to say. He drew a breath. You asked whether I wanted a wife or merely a woman capable of managing the position. And you answered. I answered badly. No, Your Grace. You answered plainly. Lady Millicent's fan opened with a soft whisper. Catherine did not look at her. The humiliation would not become smaller merely because a rival enjoyed it. Ambrose took one step away from the window. You possess every quality required of the Duchess of Norchester. Composure. Discretion. Judgment. An understanding of duty. You could stand beside me without demanding that I become another man. How generous. The faint color beneath his cheekbones deepened. You know I did not mean that as an insult. You described a household appointment. Catherine held his gaze. Then, when I asked whether the woman herself mattered, you informed me that 100 others would serve. I said there were 100 women of similar suitability. That is not kinder. So Alton shifted in his chair. Lady Pierce looked toward the door as though wishing a servant would enter and rescue them from the obligation to remain witnesses. No servant came. Ambrose lowered his voice. Miss Ellingford, this discussion should not continue before others. It began before others. Catherine crossed to the chair near the hearth where her dark green walking coat lay folded. She lifted it without haste. The wool was serviceable rather than fashionable, purchased from her own annuity 5 years earlier. A neat repair marked the left cuff, made 3 winters ago after a nail had caught the fabric. One horn button at the throat was darker than the others. She had always liked that it did not pretend to match. Ambrose watched her settle the coat across her shoulders. You needn't leave this moment. Catherine fastened the mismatched button. Her fingers were cold, but they obeyed her. No, Your Grace. I am choosing the plainest course. Catherine. It was the first time he had used her Christian name. The sound of it almost undid her because she had wanted, against good judgment, to hear it differently. She had liked his dry wit. She had noticed that he moved a chair before the Dowager Duchess had to admit her knee troubled her. She had admired the way he listened when a man spoke on a matter he respected. She had begun to wonder whether restraint in him concealed depth rather than distance. Now he used familiarity only after withdrawing respect. Catherine turned. Please don't make familiarity another privilege you claim after deciding I am replaceable. Ambrose went still. For one instant, regret reached his face without the protection of rank. It came too late to alter her choice. Catherine curtsied. Lady Millicent. Sir Alton. Lady Pierce. Lady Pierce rose halfway from her chair. Miss Ellingford, surely there has been a misunderstanding. There has been an understanding at last. Catherine looked once more at Ambrose. You said you could find 100 women like me. She drew on her gloves. Then your grace has no cause to detain this one. She left before anyone could answer. Mrs. Margaret Ellingford was waiting in the entrance hall with her reticule clasped between both hands. At 58, Catherine's paternal aunt was compact, sharp-eyed, and too experienced to be impressed by ceilings 3 stories high. She saw Catherine's coat, the set of her shoulders, and the footman hurrying toward the portico. The carriage was ordered for 4, Margaret said. It is not yet 3. It will come now. What happened? Catherine walked toward the doors as the footman opened them. Cold air entered the hall. His Grace clarified his position. Margaret followed without asking permission. And yours? Catherine tightened the darker horn button beneath her throat. Mine is in the carriage. The hired vehicle arrived within minutes. Catherine did not look back at Falconhurst as the wheels turned down the drive. Only when the house had vanished behind beech trees did Margaret take her hand. Catherine's glove was cold even through the older woman's fingers. You do not need to be composed for me. Catherine kept her eyes upon the hedgerows sliding past the window. I am not composed. I am decided. The distinction steadied her. Pain remained. She would not dictionary it by pretending otherwise. Yet pain did not require surrender. Ambrose had measured her as though she were a solution to a ducal problem. She would not remain where her individuality had been treated as an inconvenience. The carriage left the estate road and climbed above St. Elwyn's Cove. Afternoon was already failing. Wind moved through the gorse, bending it in long dark waves. Below, fishing boats returned toward the harbour, their sails reduced against the roughening water. Margaret sat back, giving Catherine the privacy of silence. Catherine watched the sea because it demanded nothing from her. Then a light appeared on the northern headland. Blue. It vanished. Catherine leaned closer to the glass. The abandoned signal tower stood against the sky, a broken outline above the cliff. A second blue flash opened and closed. Several heartbeats passed. A third followed. Catherine's grief disappeared beneath attention. Her father had taught her coastal signals during his later shore appointments, when an old naval officer with damaged lungs could no longer serve at sea but could still teach his daughter the language of lamps, flags, and distance. An approved warning on that coast should have been steady white. Blue was wrong. 3 separated flashes were deliberate. Catherine struck the carriage roof with the silver end of Margaret's reticule. The driver slowed. Stop, she called. The carriage halted on the cliff road. Margaret looked toward the headland. What is it? A false signal. Catherine opened the door before the footman could descend. Wind caught the edge of her coat. Far below, a dark fishing yawl altered course. Its bow turned north, away from the harbour entrance and toward a line of hidden rocks beneath the tower. That boat answered it, Catherine said. The driver twisted upon the box. Miss? Where is the Coast Guard station? Less than a mile, down by the quay. Take us there now. The lower road is steep. Then drive carefully and quickly. Margaret leaned forward. How certain are you? Catherine watched the yawl turn farther toward danger. Certain enough that we cannot continue home. The carriage lurched downhill. Wheels struck wet ruts as the driver urged the tired horse toward the cove. Catherine kept the tower in view whenever the road opened between the hedges. No fourth flash came. That made the first 3 more troubling, not less. Whoever had shown them expected the message to be understood. Men were already pointing from the quay when the carriage reached the whitewash station. Catherine stepped down before the footman could offer his hand. Her coat snapped in the wind as she crossed the stones. A broad-shouldered man in a dark Coast Guard coat emerged from the station door. Chief Officer Bramwell, she asked. Henry Bramwell. He looked from Catherine to the headland. What have you seen? 3 blue flashes from the abandoned tower. Measured intervals. A fishing yawl changed course after the third. Bramwell's face hardened. Toward the North Reef. Yes. Catherine pointed across the water. The yawl had begun to disappear behind a rising swell. An authorized warning should be steady white. Bramwell seized the bell rope beside the station door. It should. He pulled once, and the iron alarm rang across the quay. Then he looked at Catherine with the grave attention of a man who understood exactly what her report meant. That tower has no lawful lamp. The bell's iron voice rolled across St. Elwyn's quay, and men began moving before its final note had faded. Chief Officer Bramwell pointed toward the harbour wall. Raise the steady white lamp. Keep it fixed on the safe channel. A young coastguardsman seized the lantern, but his hands shook as the yawl vanished behind another swell. Catherine took the frame from him without ceremony. Hold the oil flask upright, she said. I'll keep the light steady. Bramwell gave one sharp nod. Do it. The lantern burned white against the deepening dusk. Catherine carried it to the marked position on the quay and held it at shoulder height. Wind drove spray across the stones and darkened the wool of her coat. The fishing yawl had already turned too far north. Its sail shifted as the crew finally recognized the reef, but the current had caught the vessel broadside. Bramwell ordered for men into the Coast Guard boat and called for fishermen willing to follow. A second boat launched from beneath the harbour sheds. Oars struck the water in hard, measured strokes. Don't move the lamp after them, Bramwell called. They need one fixed point. I understand. Catherine braced her feet against the wet stones. Mrs. Margaret Ellingford stood beneath the station awning, one hand gripping her reticule. She did not ask Catherine to leave. She knew better than to confuse fear with helplessness. Bramwell sent a mounted messenger toward Falconhurst Park. The Tower and North Road stand on Caversham land, he explained. His Grace must open the estate boathouse and lower gate. Catherine's fingers tightened around the lantern handle. Ambrose's words were less than an hour old, but the sea had no interest in humiliation. A shout rose from the water. The yawl lurched. One man disappeared over the side. Catherine's breath stopped. The white beam trembled once, then steadied. Hold it, Bramwell said. I am holding it. Hooves sounded on the road above the station before the rescue boats reached the yawl. Ambrose came down the slope on a black horse, his riding coat unbuttoned and his hat low against the wind. A lighter gig followed, driven by a harbour clerk. Tobias Sedgwick sat beside him. Catherine knew the name from Falconhurst conversation. He managed the Rowley family's leased warehouses and had the reputation of a man who could account for every cask in the harbour before breakfast. Ambrose dismounted before a groom could reach him. His gaze found Catherine holding the lamp, wet hair loosened against her cheek and the dark green coat shining with spray. Surprise crossed his face. He did not speak to her first. Bramwell. The chief officer came up from the lower steps. A yawl answered an unlawful blue signal from the old tower, Your Grace. Miss Ellingford saw the pattern and brought warning. Ambrose looked toward the northern headland. What do you need? The estate boathouse opened. Every sound rope brought down. Fresh horses for coastal messages. Blankets, lamps, and any men who know the lower path. You have them. Ambrose turned to the harbour clerk. Send to Falconhurst. Open the boathouse and lower gate. Bring the estate surgeon. No one enters the signal tower unless Bramwell permits it. At once, Your Grace. Tobias stepped from the gig and adjusted his gloves. This may be nothing more than fishermen amusing themselves with coloured glass. His concern was perfectly arranged and entirely bloodless. Catherine looked at him over the white flame. Fishermen do not usually amuse themselves by drawing another vessel toward a reef. Tobias's eyes narrowed. You have been in Dorset only a week, Miss Ellingford. The sea does not change its meaning to accommodate county seniority. Ambrose's attention remained on Tobias. You heard the order, No one touches the tower. Tobias bowed. Of course, Your Grace. A cry came from the harbour entrance. The first rescue boat appeared between the posts, its bow lifting over the swell. 2 men hauled the missing fisherman across the gunwale. He moved weakly, but he moved. The yawl followed under shortened sail, guided between the boats toward the white signal. Catherine lowered her head for one breath. Only then did she feel the pain in her hands from gripping the lantern. Ambrose came to stand beside her, leaving a careful distance. May I take it? Not until the yawl crosses the harbour line. Then I'll stay. He did not explain. He did not apologize in the middle of a rescue. Catherine was grateful for that much. When Bramwell raised his arm from the boat, she closed the shutter. The sudden darkness around her felt like the release of a held breath. Ambrose removed his gloves and offered them with both palms visible. Your hands are cold. So are yours. Not yet. She almost refused. Then she looked at the fisherman being carried toward the station and rejected the vanity of suffering needlessly. She took the gloves. They were too large, but the leather held warmth. The rescued man was wrapped in blankets and laid near the station stove. The estate surgeon arrived with the first Falconhurst cart and ordered dry clothes, warm broth, and rest. He's exhausted and badly chilled, the surgeon said. He won't return to the water tonight. No one pretended the man was fully recovered simply because he had survived. Catherine remained inside only long enough to remove her soaked coat. She laid it across the station bench where the heat could reach it without scorching the wool. The repaired cuff was dark with water, and the mismatched horn button gleamed beneath the lamp. Bramwell waited until the yawl's crew had given their names and the rescue boats were secured. Then he selected 2 coastguardsmen for the climb to the tower. Ambrose joined them. Tobias announced that his knowledge of the harbour roads might be useful. Bramwell regarded him for one unreadable moment. You may come. You will touch nothing. Catherine drew her damp coat back over her shoulders. Ambrose lifted it from the bench but did not place it around her. He held it out. She took it from him herself. Mrs. Ellingford caught Catherine's sleeve. You are not climbing that path alone. I won't be alone. That was not my objection. Catherine softened. Stay with the fisherman. I'll return with Mr. Bramwell's party. Margaret studied Bramwell, then Ambrose. See that she does. She'll return under Coast Guard escort, Bramwell said. The climb took them through wet gorse and over a path narrowed by wind and darkness. Ambrose walked behind Catherine where the cliff rose steeply. He remained close enough to help if she slipped, but he did not touch her. Tobias complained that the inspection should wait for daylight. Bramwell ignored him. The old tower door stood partly open. Inside, the air smelled of oil, damp stone, and recent smoke. A crude iron stand occupied the center of the floor. Fresh scratches crossed the flagstones beneath its feet. Bramwell raised his lantern toward the northern opening. From there, a focus beam would have reached far beyond the cove. Someone used this within the hour, he said. A sound moved behind the tower. One of the coastguardsmen ran through the rear opening. Catherine reached the doorway in time to see a dark figure disappear along the path toward the gorse. Ambrose started after him. Bramwell caught his sleeve. The cliff edge is beyond that turn, Your Grace. Let him go before we lose another man tonight. The fugitive vanished. Tobias released a slow breath. Catherine noticed. She said nothing. Bramwell examined the doorway while the second coastguardsman searched the floor. Near the lowest stone step, a blue glint caught Catherine's eye. She crouched. A triangular shard of thick cobalt glass lay against the wall, one edge curved and the other freshly broken. Mr. Bramwell. He came beside her and lowered his lantern. Do not touch it yet. Catherine kept her hand still. Within the glass, a tiny star-shaped bubble had been trapped during cooling. Bramwell studied the ground around it, then nodded. Lift it by the narrow point. Catherine obeyed. The shard felt heavier than ordinary bottle glass. She held it for no more than a few seconds, long enough for Bramwell, Ambrose, Tobias, and the 2 coastguardsmen to see it. Then she placed it directly into Bramwell's open hand. He wrapped it in folded paper, wrote the date and location across the outside, and asked Ambrose and 1 coastguardsman to witness the notation. The packet went into his inner pocket. Tobias watched every movement. His left hand closed around the head of his cane. Ambrose saw it. Catherine knew because his expression sharpened, though he did not challenge the man without proof. They returned to the station shortly after midnight. The fisherman slept beneath blankets while the surgeon remained nearby. Bramwell placed the wrapped shard inside the station strongbox and turned the key himself. Catherine and Margaret left in a Falconhurst carriage because the hired horse had spent too long in the cold. Catherine refused any suggestion of returning to the estate. At the lodging house, the landlady hung the damp coat in a warm passage where it could dry slowly. Catherine returned Ambrose's gloves through the coachman. Before leaving the quay, Bramwell called a mounted coastguardsman to the station door and handed him a sealed note addressed to Nathan Pike, glazier, Weymouth. "Ride at first light," he said. "Ask whether he has handled cobalt bull's-eye glass with a star-shaped flaw. Bring the answer directly to me." The rider tucked the letter inside his coat. Bramwell looked once toward the black outline of the abandoned tower. "That shard did not come from a fisherman's bottle," he said. "It came from something made to throw a signal across open water." By the morning of the 3rd of October, the dark green coat had dried beside the kitchen passage grate, though a faint salt line remained near the hem. Catherine brushed it away before fastening the mismatched horn button beneath her throat. She had slept badly. Each time she closed her eyes, the white lamp shook in her hands and the fisherman vanished beneath the black water. Mrs. Margaret Ellingford watched from the breakfast table. "You're going back to the station?" "Chief Officer Bramwell sent for me." Catherine folded his note. "He wants a full account of the signal intervals." "And His Grace?" "The note doesn't mention him." Margaret lifted one eyebrow. "That is not the same as saying he won't be there." Catherine drew on her gloves. "His presence will not change what I saw." The Coast Guard station stood bright above the quay beneath a low grey sky. Bramwell received Catherine and her aunt in the front office, where coastal charts covered one wall and signal flags hung from wooden pegs. The station strongbox sat beneath the window. He placed one hand upon its lid. "The shard remains inside. No one has handled it since I locked it there." Catherine inclined her head. "Thank you. You need not thank me for doing this properly." He opened a notebook. "I asked you here for more than a statement. I want you to assist the inquiry." Margaret set her reticule upon her lap. "In what capacity?" "As a civilian advisor on signals and coastal sightlines." Miss Ellingford recognized a deliberate pattern when every man on the quay saw only a light. Catherine looked toward the chart. "I have no official authority." "You will not need it. You will advise me. I will make decisions and issue orders." The distinction mattered. "Then I'll assist where my knowledge is useful." Bramwell marked the abandoned tower with the end of his pencil. 3 blue flashes. Nearly equal intervals. The pause before the third was slightly longer, though the carriage was moving. Could a loose shutter have produced them? Not with that regularity. Someone opened and closed it by hand. A knock sounded at the outer door. The mounted coastguardsman who had carried Bramwell's inquiry to Weymouth entered, wet from the road, and delivered a sealed reply. Bramwell broke it in front of them. His eyes moved quickly across the page. "Nathan Pike remembers cobalt bull's-eye glass with a star-shaped flaw. He says it is rare enough that he wishes to see the fragment himself." Catherine felt the mystery narrow. "Does he remember who bought it?" "His letter does not name the purchaser. He will only speak after examining the shard." Bramwell took fresh paper from the desk. "I'll request an appointment for the 8th. The evidence will travel with me, not by messenger." The office door opened again before he finished writing. Ambrose entered in a dark riding coat, his hat in one hand. Damp marked his shoulders. He bowed first to Margaret, then to Catherine. "Mrs. Ellingford." "Miss Ellingford." Catherine returned the courtesy. "Your Grace." Bramwell sealed the appointment letter and handed it to the waiting rider. "You will take this back to Mr. Pike. Tell him we shall arrive on Monday." When the man had gone, Ambrose looked at Catherine. "Chief Officer Bramwell tells me you have agreed to advise him." "I have." "Then he has chosen well." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of everything Ambrose had failed to see in the drawing room. Catherine did not soften. Bramwell gathered his chart and keys. "We are inspecting the tower again tomorrow in daylight." Ambrose remained where he stood. "Before then, I would like to speak to Miss Ellingford." Margaret folded her hands. "You may speak here." Ambrose glanced toward Bramwell. The chief officer moved to the chart table but did not leave. "Here is appropriate," Ambrose said. He faced Catherine fully. "What I said at Falconhurst was contemptible." No excuse followed. That restraint made her listen. "I treated character as a list of qualifications," he continued. "I treated your consent as though it mattered less than your suitability." "It did not." "It does not." Catherine held his gaze. "Regret does not make a woman visible after she has been treated as an appointment." "I know." "Do you?" "Not completely." His voice remained quiet. "But I know enough to understand that an apology cannot require you to return." "I will not return to Falconhurst as a prospective duchess." "I will not ask you to." He did not use her Christian name. "I came because the tower stands on my land and because my house may have allowed someone to use it unseen." Bramwell closed his notebook. "Then tomorrow we shall discover who had access." Daylight made the abandoned tower appear smaller but more deliberate. On the 4th of October, Catherine rode in Bramwell's pony cart with Margaret while Ambrose followed on horseback. The previous night's rain had left the cliff path slick. 2 coastguardsmen waited at the lower gate beside Tobias Sedgwick and another man Catherine had not met. Tobias wore a well-cut black coat and the expression of someone inconvenienced by other people's caution. The man beside him was younger, perhaps 36, with a narrow face and pale eyes. "Your Grace," Tobias said. "Chief Officer." "Ladies. This is Edwin Rook, senior clerk for the Rowley warehouses." He brought the access register you requested. Edwin bowed. "Miss Ellingford." His manner was respectful, but his gaze moved briefly to her coat, then to Bramwell's locked case. Catherine noticed a faint smell of lamp oil when the wind shifted. One dark stain marked Edwin's cuff. It might have come from ordinary warehouse work. It proved nothing. Bramwell unlocked the tower door. Inside, daylight revealed an oval of fresh soot high upon the north wall. 4 shallow grooves crossed the flagstones beneath it. Catherine crouched without touching them. "A tripod frame stood here," she said. It was dragged toward the opening after use. Bramwell measured the grooves with a folding rule. Near the wall, he found a short tarred fiber cord between stones and folded it into paper. The rear path descended through gorse toward the hidden inlet. Halfway down stood a wooden gate with no sign of forced entry. Ambrose selected a key from the estate ring. The lock turned smoothly. "Falconhurst pattern," Catherine said. Ambrose looked at Tobias. "Who has copies?" Tobias opened the register Edwin had brought. "Your steward, the gamekeeper, myself, and Mr. Rook. One former warehouse clerk was issued a copy 3 years ago." Bramwell took the register. "Was it returned?" Edwin answered before Tobias could. "There is no written return, sir." The man left after an argument over wages. "His name?" "Peter Mould." "Where is he now?" "I don't know." Catherine looked at Edwin's boots. Square-headed hobnails pressed a clear pattern into the damp soil. Similar marks crossed the path, though rain had softened their edges. She did not mistake resemblance for proof. "How often do you use this gate, Mr. Rook?" she asked. "Rarely. Yet you hold a key." "The warehouses sometimes receive timber from the North Road." "At night?" His pale eyes met hers. "Not by my order." Tobias gave a thin smile. "Miss Ellingford seems determined to make a conspiracy from every practical arrangement." "Practical arrangements explain access," Catherine replied. "They do not explain innocence." Ambrose's attention shifted to Edwin's cuff. "When did you last handle lamp oil?" "This morning, Your Grace." "One of the warehouse lanterns leaked." "Which warehouse?" "Number 3. Bramwell wrote down the answer. He then examined the gate register and found that one page had been cut close to the binding. The missing leaf covered entries from the previous fortnight. Tobias's composure tightened. "Clerk's damage books." "Then your clerks will explain this one," Bramwell said. Ambrose removed the estate key from the lock and closed his hand around it. "Until this inquiry is complete, Mr. Sedgwick and Mr. Rook are both denied unrestricted access to the Cliff Road, Tower, North Inlet, and Estate Boathouse." Tobias stepped forward. "Your Grace, that will obstruct lawful trade." "Lawful trade can proceed through the public key. The Rowley lease grants access for warehouse operations. It does not grant unrecorded movement through a dangerous coastal road." Ambrose's voice never rose. "You will surrender your copies to Bramwell before leaving." Edwin reached into his coat and produced a long iron key. Tobias waited several seconds before doing the same. Bramwell wrapped each separately and marked the owners' names. "The missing former clerk's key remains unaccounted for," he said. "And someone removed the recent gate entries." Catherine stood at the northern opening and looked toward the inlet below. A vessel landing there would be invisible from St. Elwyn's Quay. Only a person with the right sight line, tide knowledge, and access could guide it safely. Ambrose stopped several paces behind her. "You saw what the rest of us failed to see." The light was visible to anyone on the road. Seeing it was not the same as understanding it. Catherine turned. His admiration was unmistakable now, but she would not accept it as payment for the insult. "Then learn the difference." "I intend to." Bramwell called them back toward the gate. He held Pike's reply in one hand and the access register in the other. "Mr. Pike remembers the glass," he said. His gaze settled first on Tobias, then on Edwin. "On Monday, we shall learn which man ordered the lamp." On the 8th of October, rain silvered the road to Weymouth and filled every rut between St. Elwyn's Cove and the southern harbour. Chief Officer Bramwell arrived at Mrs. Ellingford's lodgings before 7 with the cobalt shard still sealed inside the folded paper in which he had wrapped it at the abandoned tower. The packet bore the date, the place, and the witness marks of Ambrose and the coastguardsman who had stood beside him. Bramwell placed it inside a narrow leather case, fastened the brass clasp, and kept the case beneath his coat. "It won't leave my possession," he said as Catherine joined him at the carriage. "Mr. Pike may examine it in front of us. He won't retain it." Mrs. Margaret Ellingford approved with a grave nod. Ambrose was waiting beside the Falconhurst carriage in a dark travelling coat, his hat damp at the brim. He opened the door for Catherine and her aunt, then stepped back rather than offering his hand. Catherine entered without assistance. She noticed the restraint because she had begun noticing every moment in which he chose not to assume. Bramwell took the rear-facing seat beside Ambrose. The carriage set off through the wet morning, moving slowly where the road climbed and faster across firmer ground. For the first hour, the only conversation concerned tide tables, the missing page from the access register, and the former clerk whose key had never been formally returned. "Peter Mould has not worked in Dorset for 2 years, Bramwell said. A constable in Dorchester believes he went north after losing money at cards." "Then his missing key may still have passed to someone else," Catherine replied. "Or the record of its return may have been cut from the register," Ambrose said. Bramwell looked at him. "You believe the missing page was removed to create uncertainty?" I believe uncertainty benefits whoever used the gate. Catherine watched the hedgerows move past the rain-streaked glass. Mr. Rook knew at once that the former clerk's key had no written return. He manages warehouse records, Ambrose said. He would know. Yes. Catherine turned toward him. That is why the knowledge proves access, not guilt. Ambrose inclined his head. You are determined not to make suspicion larger than evidence. Suspicion already has enough assistance from imagination. His gaze held hers for one quiet moment. I am learning that. Mrs. Ellingford looked out the opposite window, though the slight movement at the corner of her mouth suggested she had heard. The road bent inland, then descended toward Weymouth. Nearly 3 hours after leaving St. Elwyn's, masts appeared beyond the roofs. Warehouses crowded the water, their brick walls dark with rain and coal smoke. Bramwell directed the coachman to a narrow shop near the quay. Ship lanterns hung in the windows beside panes of red, green, and clear glass. Nathan Pike received them at a long cutting table. He was a narrow man with silver spectacles and hands scored by years of working sharp edges. He bowed to Ambrose, but Bramwell placed the leather case on the table before Rank could change the purpose of the visit. You asked to see the fragment. I did. Pike washed and dried his hands, then adjusted the lamp above the table. Bramwell opened the case and unfolded the sealed paper without allowing the shard to leave the wrapping. Pike leaned close. The cobalt glass held the lamplight in its depth. Bull's-eye lens, he said. Not a flat signal pane. See the curve along this edge? It was cut to focus light. Catherine bent nearer without touching the table. The star-shaped bubble remained trapped near the broken side. Pike pointed with a clean wooden stylus. That flaw is why I remembered it. Air caught during cooling. I marked it in my work ledger because the customer complained, though the flaw did not affect the beam. Bramwell's attention sharpened. You cut the lens. I did. Pike crossed to a shelf, removed a large ledger, and turned through several pages. Only 6 cobalt bull's-eye lenses of this thickness passed through my shop last year. 5 went to Chandler's. 1 was made for private use. Ambrose stood very still. Who ordered it? Pike placed one finger beside the entry. Mr. Tobias Sedgwick. Catherine felt the room contract around the name. In his own capacity, she asked. He described himself as managing factor for the Rowley warehouse lease at Falconhurst Harbour. Pike turned the ledger so Bramwell could read it. Payment came through the bonded account of the Earl of Dentwick's estate office. The formal lease is held in the Earl's name. Mr. Sedgwick manages the warehouses. That settled the legal structure Bramwell had been trying to clarify. Tobias did not own the lease. He operated beneath Rowley authority. What exactly did he order? Bramwell asked. A brass lantern frame, 1 cobalt lens, and repeated shutters fitted on side hinges. Repeated. Catherine said. Strong enough to open and close many times without loosening. He said the lamp was for theatrical illumination during private entertainments. Would a theatrical lamp require a focused beam visible over open water? Not commonly. Pike looked uncomfortable. The order was properly paid. I did not ask more. Catherine studied the ledger. Did Mr. Sedgwick collect the frame himself? Pike shook his head. No. A warehouse clerk came for it. He ran his finger lower on the page. Edwin Rook. He signed the receipt. Bramwell's eyes lifted. You are certain? I remember him. Pale eyes. Very little conversation. He inspected the hinges twice and asked whether the shutters could be worked with gloves. Catherine thought of Edwin's square-headed hobnails, the lamp oil stain on his cuff, and his claim that he rarely used the cliff gate. None of those things proved he had carried the lens to the tower. Together, they made his calm more difficult to dismiss. Pike looked again at the shard. The thickness, curvature, color, and star-shaped flaw match the lens I cut. I can say that with confidence. I cannot swear the fragment belongs to that exact lens unless I see the remaining broken edge. Then you will say no more than the evidence permits, Bramwell replied. That is exactly what I will say. He copied the relevant ledger entry in Pike's presence while Pike signed beneath it. The original ledger remained in the shop. Bramwell resealed the shard inside the same marked paper and returned it to the leather case. No one else touched it. As they prepared to leave, Catherine asked, could an ordinary fisherman have purchased glass of this quality without drawing notice? Pike gave a brief, humorless breath. He could have purchased it if he possessed enough money. He would not have done so sensibly. Bottle glass costs a fraction of the price. Rain had strengthened while they were inside. The harbour steps shone black beneath the grey sky. Mrs. Ellingford descended first with Bramwell's assistance. Catherine placed one foot on the upper step and felt her boot slide on wet stone. Ambrose stood below. He did not seize her arm. He raised one hand, palm open, and waited. For a heartbeat, Catherine saw the man who had judged her as an item of suitability. Then she saw the man who had learned enough to offer support without claiming the right to give it. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed carefully around hers. He steadied her down one step, then another. The contact was warm, deliberate, and stronger than the cold rain between them. When Catherine reached the key, Ambrose released her at once. "Thank you," she said. "You are welcome." He did not ask whether the moment had changed anything. That restraint followed her into the carriage. On the return journey, Bramwell studied Pike's copied entry while Margaret rested with her eyes closed. Catherine looked across at Ambrose. "Will you confront Lady Millicent?" "Not yet. Because she is the daughter of an earl. Because an estate account can be used by factors, clerks, and authorized agents." His answer came without defensiveness. "The connection is serious. It is not proof that she knew the purpose of the order." Catherine inclined her head. "That is the correct judgment. You sound surprised." "I am revising my assessment in response to new evidence." Something like amusement touched his mouth. "Then I should be grateful evidence remains capable of helping me." "Do not be grateful yet." "I won't." They reached St. Elwyn's Cove near dusk. Bramwell carried the shard directly to the Coast Guard station and locked it inside the strongbox before any of them separated. Catherine and Margaret returned to their lodgings, where a silver tray waited upon the hall table. On it lay a calling card edged in pale blue. Lady Millicent Rowley had written a private line beneath her name. Falconhurst Park would host a lifeboat subscription dinner on the 20th of October. Catherine's presence, the message said, would demonstrate that recent misunderstandings had not disturbed county harmony. Margaret read the note over Catherine's shoulder. "That is not an invitation." "No." Catherine turned the card between her fingers. "It is a stage." "Then refuse it." Catherine thought of Tobias placing the order, Edwin collecting the shutter frame, and Millicent's family account paying for both. She thought of merchants who would speak more carelessly at dinner than in Bramwell's office. "I shall attend." Margaret studied her. "Because you believe Lady Millicent is involved?" "Because I do not yet know whether she is." Catherine laid the card back on the tray. "But she has chosen the room, the witnesses, and the occasion. She does not merely want me present." Her gaze rested on Millicent's precise handwriting. "She wants me inside a room she believes she controls." By the 11th of October, the wind had shifted east and sharpened every edge of the Dorset coast. Catherine stood above the abandoned tower with Chief Officer Bramwell while he aligned a compass with the northern opening. The cobalt shard remained locked in the Coast Guard station, and Nathan Pike's signed account of the lens order rested in Bramwell's dispatch case. Nothing had been brought to the cliff except charts, a folding rule, and 2 ordinary lanterns for measuring sightlines. Ambrose waited near the rear path with his horse, his dark coat moving in the gusts. He had not asked Catherine whether she still intended to attend the subscription dinner. He had accepted her decision as her own. That should not have felt remarkable. Yet after Falconhurst, every instance in which he chose not to command remained visible to her. Bramwell pointed toward the secluded inlet below. A focused lamp in the northern opening can be seen from nearly 2 miles out when the weather is clear. Catherine followed the line from tower to sea. The narrow approach disappeared behind the headland before reaching the inlet. A boat entering there would vanish from the village quay, she said. Exactly. Bramwell lowered the compass. The light tells a vessel more than where to steer. It tells the crew when the public harbour cannot see the landing. Ambrose looked toward the warehouse roofs beyond St. Elwyn's. Someone must also know when patrols move, which labours are working, and which roads are clear. That describes a managing factor, Catherine said. It also describes a senior clerk. Bramwell closed the compass. Then we speak to someone who has watched the roads longer than either man has managed them. They descended by the rear path toward 3 fishermen's cottages behind a low stone wall. The smallest belonged to Mrs. Dane, a widow whose husband had drowned 6 years earlier. She opened the door only after Bramwell identified himself twice. Her black wool dress had gone shiny at the elbows, and her reddened hands tightened around the latch when she saw Ambrose. "I've nothing to say against His Grace's people." "We have not asked you to speak against anyone," Catherine said. "Only to tell Mr. Bramwell what you have seen." Mrs. Dane's gaze moved to her. Seeing doesn't feed sons when warehouse shifts disappear. Through the open door, Catherine saw 2 pairs of heavy boots beside the hearth. "Your sons work under Mr. Sedgwick. When he gives them hours. And Mr. Rook. He writes the night lists. A man may be told there's no place for him before Mr. Sedgwick ever hears his name." Ambrose shifted beside the wall. Catherine spoke before he could offer help. "If you give a statement, it will go through Chief Officer Bramwell. Not through Falconhurst. Your sons will not be offered work in exchange for your words." Mrs. Dane's face hardened. "Can you promise they won't be punished?" No. Ambrose looked at Catherine, but she held the widow's gaze. "I can promise that I won't pretend there is no danger. I can promise your words will be recorded by an officer who does not answer to Mr. Sedgwick or Mr. Rook. And I can promise no one here will purchase your gratitude and call it protection." The widow studied her for a long moment. Bramwell did not open his notebook. "You may speak today, later, or not at all." Mrs. Dane looked toward the inlet. "The boats come when the blue light shows 3 times. Bramwell opened the notebook then. "How often?" "Sometimes twice in a month. Sometimes nothing for 6 weeks. Always when the tide reaches the lower black stone." Catherine glanced toward the rocks below. "What happens after the flashes?" "A vessel enters without sail. Covered carts wait near the old landing place. By sunrise, there's nothing left but wheel marks." "Who brings the carts?" Bramwell asked. Mrs. Dane hesitated. "Mr. Rook checks the night loads. He carries a list and walks beside the first cart. Mr. Sedgwick does not always come." Ambrose's jaw tightened. "Have you seen Lady Millicent Rowley?" Catherine asked. "Not on the shore. Her travelling carriage has come to the warehouses on landing nights." "How did you recognize it?" "The rear wheel has a chipped iron rim. It leaves a notch in the mud at every turn." Bramwell wrote that down. "When did you last see it?" 3 weeks ago. Near midnight." "Do you know what cargo was landed?" Mrs. Dane shook her head. "No. But the men spoke of winter goods settling everything before the creditors came again." "Which creditors?" Catherine asked. "Denswick's. That is what one of the carters said. He laughed that the Earl's fine house was standing on French lace and brandy. The information was rumour, not proof, but it gave shape to Millicent's polished calm. Family debt could turn ambition into urgency." Mrs. Dane looked toward Ambrose at last. "If I speak formally, my sons may lose every shift." Ambrose's answer came slowly. "Then I will not move them to estate work while your testimony is under inquiry. Miss Ellingford is right. It would make your truth appear bought." Catherine felt his glance but did not return it. Chief Officer Bramwell will decide what protection is lawful, Ambrose continued. Falconhurst will provide records and access, not favours. Mrs. Dane's shoulders lowered by a fraction. I'll give the statement. Bramwell asked his questions carefully. Mrs. Dane described the blue flashes, the lower black stone, Edwin's night lists, the Rowley carriage, and the covered carts. She refused to name 2 fishermen she believed had helped unload. Bramwell did not press once she explained that she had not seen their faces. When they left the cottage, the wind had strengthened enough to drive grit along the path. Ambrose waited until they were beyond the stone wall. I would have offered her son's work. I know, Catherine said. And Tobias would have said you purchased testimony. He would not need proof. Only repetition. Ambrose looked back at the cottage. Then how do I protect them? Bramwell answered. By helping me obtain evidence strong enough that Sedgwick cannot control the result. Catherine added, and by accepting that protection may require restraint before it permits action. The path rose steeply toward the tower. A hard gust struck the cliff and forced them into a stone watch shelter built into the hillside. Bramwell went to the opening to study the tide while the horses were led behind the wall. Catherine sat upon the narrow bench and removed one glove to ready the scarf at her throat. Ambrose remained standing until she looked toward the empty space at the other end. He sat, leaving a measured distance between them. For a time, only the wind spoke. Then he said, My father described marriage as though he were filling a permanent office in the household. Catherine looked toward the grey sea. And you believed him? I believed repetition made a principle respectable. His voice lacked its usual certainty. A duchess required birth, health, composure, and obedience to duty. Affection was considered fortunate but unnecessary. You called coldness honesty. Yes. And because you admitted the coldness, you believed the arrangement fair. Yes. Ambrose lowered one hand to the bench between them, palm down. I did not understand that I was asking a woman to disappear inside a role. Catherine turned toward him. You understood enough to value the role more than the woman. He accepted the blow without retreat. I did. The wind pressed against the shelter opening. Bramwell remained several paces away, occupied with the tide line. Ambrose turned his hand, palm upward, but did not move it closer. I do not know how to undo what I said. You cannot undo it. Catherine looked at the open hand. You can decide whether it revealed the whole truth about you, or only the truth about the man you have been. His fingers remained still. The choice was hers. Catherine removed her other glove and placed her hand in his. Ambrose closed his fingers gently, firm enough to hold and no more. Neither spoke. His face remained controlled, but his pulse moved quickly beneath her fingertips. The knowledge touched her more deeply than any practiced declaration could have done. He was not calm. He was trying to be worthy of her choice while fearing he was not. Catherine let the contact remain. It was not forgiveness. It was the first fragile proof that trust might someday grow where certainty had failed. When the wind eased, she withdrew her hand. Ambrose released her immediately. As Catherine stood, the mismatched horn button at her throat pulled loose on its thread. She caught it before it fell. Ambrose glanced toward the dark button. Falconhurst seamstress could secure that. So can I. Catherine took a small sewing case from her reticule. The needle was already threaded with dark cotton. She made 3 firm stitches while Ambrose watched without offering again. By late afternoon, Catherine and Margaret had returned to their lodgings. The repaired button held securely beneath Catherine's throat. Near dusk, a boy from Mrs. Dane arrived with a folded note addressed to Bramwell. Catherine did not open it. She carried it herself to the Coast Guard station, where Bramwell broke the seal in her presence. The widow had written only 2 lines. A cargo of French lace was expected before Lady Millicent's lifeboat dinner. The landing tide would reach the lower Black Stone on the same night. Ambrose found the warrant on the 15th of October beneath 33 years of dust and the weight of a family name he had once believed could bear anything. The Falconhurst archive occupied a narrow room behind the estate library, where old ledgers stood in calfskin rows and coastal maps lay beneath linen covers. Mr. Pell, the archivist, placed a cracked document box on the long table and withdrew a folded parchment bearing the faded seal of the late Duke of Norchester. This was entered in the emergency register in 1816, Your Grace. Ambrose opened it carefully. The warrant permitted naval stores, wounded men, and dispatch vessels to land at the North Inlet during periods of military necessity. It authorized temporary access through the Caversham Gate for Crown officers. It did not permit private commerce. It did not authorize bonded goods, secret carts, or blue signals 3 decades after the war. Yet the late Duke's signature stood at the bottom, broad and unmistakable. Who knew this existed? Ambrose asked. Your father. The former steward. Samuel Vane, most likely. Mr. Pell hesitated. There is more. He removed a thin memorandum from the same box. The paper was dated 1847. Tobias Sedgwick had written to ask whether historic landing rights remained attached to the Rowley warehouse lease. A note in the margin recorded that no formal opinion had been issued. Beneath it lay a receipt for 1 Falconhurst pattern key, signed by Edwin Rooke. Ambrose read the 2 names twice. Tobias had not invented ducal authority. He had searched for its abandoned outline. Edwin had been given the means to pass through it. Why was this not brought to me? The memorandum was filed as a historical inquiry, Your Grace. The key was issued for warehouse timber deliveries. And never recovered. There is no record of its return. Mr. Pell looked toward the locked door. Shall I send for Chief Officer Bramwell? Ambrose should have said yes. Instead, he heard the county's judgment before it existed. House Caversham had left a wartime passage unsecured. Falconhurst had permitted agents of a Rowley lease to hold estate keys. The late Duke's warrant had given smugglers the appearance of inherited permission. If Bramwell received the document immediately, every political opponent in London and every merchant in Dorset would ask whether negligence had become complicity. Worse, Catherine would learn that the system she already distrusted had hidden danger beneath the dignity of his title. I will obtain a legal opinion first, he said. Prepare a certified copy, but the original remains here. Mr. Pell bowed. Ambrose locked the parchment, memorandum, and key receipt inside the archive box and kept the key. A solicitor came from Dorchester that afternoon and returned the following day with a written opinion. By the 17th, there was no uncertainty left. The 1816 warrant had no present force. It could not lawfully shield private landings. Its importance lay not in what it authorized, but in what Tobias might have persuaded others to believe. Ambrose stood alone in the archive with the solicitor's letter in his hand. 2 days of caution had been defensible. Every hour after that would be a choice. He still did not send for Bramwell. He told himself he needed time to examine the lease. He told himself public disclosure before the subscription dinner might scatter the conspirators. He told himself a duke had a duty to understand damage before releasing it. Beneath those arguments lived a simpler truth. He wanted control over the moment in which Catherine discovered his house had helped create the very danger she was trying to expose. On the 18th of October, Catherine returned to Falconhurst with Mrs. Margaret Ellingford for the final arrangements before the lifeboat subscription dinner. She came at the Dowager Duchess's formal request and Chief Officer Bramwell's practical one. The dark green coat was fastened at her throat, its mismatched horn button secure beneath the stitches she had made herself. Ambrose received her in the morning room with Bramwell, the Dowager Duchess, and Lady Millicent Rowley. Millicent wore dove-grey silk and an expression of patient graciousness. Mary Noakes stood behind her chair with a folded shawl over one arm. Edwin Rooke waited near the service door holding a warehouse delivery list. Catherine noticed him at once. His pale eyes moved toward Bramwell's dispatch case before settling upon the carpet. Miss Ellingford, Millicent said. How admirable that recent unpleasantness has not discouraged your public spirit. Danger to fishing families is not a private unpleasantness, Catherine replied. The Dowager Duchess concealed a flicker of approval behind her teacup. Bramwell unfolded the guest list. 3 harbour merchants, 2 chandlers, fishermen's representatives, the parish committee, and several county families had accepted. Tobias and Edwin would attend on behalf of the Rowley warehouse lease. The dinner will be in the great dining room, Ambrose said. Subscriptions will be recorded in the adjoining saloon. The music room will serve as the ladies' cloakroom. Millicent turned toward Mary. My maid will assist the household attendants. Mary lowered her eyes. A servant entered carrying a sealed note on a silver tray. For Lady Millicent. From the Denswick Estate Office. Millicent broke the seal. The colour left her face for one brief instant before she folded the paper beneath her hand. Nothing urgent, she said. Edwin glanced toward her. The creditors have pressed the winter account again, my lady. The room went still. Millicent's gaze struck him sharply. You mistake the matter. Of course. Edwin bowed. Catherine stored the exchange without enlarging it. Debt could explain urgency. It did not prove smuggling. Bramwell asked Millicent whether she had authorized Tobias to use the Rowley account for cobalt glass. My father's estate office pays hundreds of orders, she replied. I don't inspect every purchase made by a factor. Did you know Edwin Rook collected the brass frame? Catherine asked. Edwin answered before Millicent could. I collected many warehouse fittings, miss. Mr. Sedgwick gave me an invoice. I had no reason to question it. Did you test the shutters while wearing gloves? His composure faltered by a fraction. Mr. Pike may remember more than occurred. Bramwell's voice remained even. Then you will have an opportunity to state your own account formally. Mary's hands tightened around the shawl. Catherine turned toward her. Miss Noakes, have you ever seen blue glass delivered to a Rowley residence or warehouse? Mary's lips parted. Millicent did not look back, but one finger pressed into the arm of her chair. I haven't, miss. The denial came too quickly. You are certain? Yes. Mary's breathing had changed. Catherine saw fear, not merely nervousness. I did not ask about accounts, she said gently. Only whether you had seen it. I haven't. Millicent lifted her cup. My maid has answered. Bramwell made a note and moved on. The household party inspected the dining room, saloon, and music room. Ivory counters had been placed beside the cloak hooks. Edwin checked a delivery list with the butler near the service entrance, giving him a reason to move between warehouse carts and household passages without attracting notice. Catherine watched him disappear behind the green baize door. In the music room, Mary explained the cloakroom procedure. The attendant receives each wrap and gives the guest a numbered counter. I'll carry the garments behind the curtain. Catherine removed her coat. Then use mine as a trial. Mary accepted it across both arms. Her fingers touched the repaired cuff. She looked past Catherine toward the doorway. Millicent stood there, motionless. Take care with it, Catherine said. Mary swallowed. I will, miss. The rehearsal continued. When the other attendants moved into the saloon, Catherine returned for her coat. Before she entered, she heard Millicent's voice behind the curtain, low and controlled. You know what must be done. Mary answered too softly to be understood. Catherine stepped inside. Both women turned. Millicent smiled. We were discussing the order of the wraps. Then Miss Noakes has been given clear instructions. Catherine held out her hands. Mary returned the coat directly to her. Catherine checked the left cuff, the secure horn button, and the weight of the fabric before putting it on. Nothing had been altered. Mary watched her fasten it, and relief passed across the maid's face so briefly that Catherine almost doubted it. Ambrose met Catherine near the long windows before she departed. Mrs. Ellingford remained within hearing. You are not obliged to attend on Saturday, he said. I know. Millicent has arranged the evening to create pressure. That is why I will be there. Catherine studied him. Something divided his attention. It was not fear of Tobias or concern about the dinner. It felt older, closer to the house itself. Is there anything else Chief Officer Bramwell should know before then? She asked. The question reached the locked archive room between them. Ambrose had only to answer honestly. Nothing I am prepared to state without certainty, he said. Catherine's expression changed, though she could not know why. Certainty can become a convenient name for delay. She bowed. Good day, Your Grace. Ambrose stood beneath the Falconhurst windows as her carriage crossed the drive. The dark green coat remained visible until the road turned beyond the beech trees. In the archive behind him, the 1816 warrant waited under his key. By then, the law was no longer uncertain. Only his courage was. By the evening of the 20th of October, Falconhurst Park glittered as though no danger had ever crossed its cliffs. Carriage lamps moved beneath the portico. Footmen received cloaks and cards while music drifted from the saloon, where the lifeboat subscription ledger lay open beneath silver candelabra. County families arrived in silk and black broadcloth. Harbour merchants bowed beside fishermen whose hands still bore the marks of rope and salt. Chief Officer Bramwell attended with 2 coastguardsmen as invited representatives of the service the evening claimed to support. Catherine entered beside Mrs. Margaret Ellingford, wearing a dove-grey gown beneath her dark green walking coat. The repaired left cuff lay smooth against her wrist, and the mismatched horn button remained secure beneath her throat. Every glance found her before courtesy could disguise itself. Some guests knew she had left Falconhurst after the Duke's insult. Others knew only that she had become Bramwell's advisor in the false signal inquiry. Society disliked an unfinished explanation. It preferred one that lowered a woman. Lady Millicent Rowley received them near the great dining-room doors in white satin beneath pale blue net. Miss Ellingford, she said. How generous of you to come after so much unpleasantness. The lifeboat is worth supporting. Catherine looked beyond her to Mary Noakes, who stood beside the household cloakroom attendant. Mary's face was colourless. Of course, Millicent replied. Public duty can be a comfort when private expectations fail. Margaret's fingers tightened around her reticule. Catherine did not reward the remark. She removed her coat and placed it into the attendant's hands. A numbered ivory counter was looped around her wrist. Mary stepped forward to carry the garment behind the music room curtain. Her fingers paused over the repaired cuff. Then she glanced toward Millicent. Take care with it, Catherine said. Mary looked at her sharply. I will, miss. The coat disappeared from sight. Catherine felt an unreasonable urge to follow it. Instead, she entered the dining room with her aunt and took the place assigned across from Mrs. Dane. The widow sat rigidly among people who normally saw her only when they required fish, washing, or silence. Ambrose had ordered the seating arranged by committee rather than rank. Lady Millicent had objected. The result placed merchants, fishermen, and county guests close enough to hear one another's truths. Ambrose stood at the head of the table, grave beneath the candlelight. His gaze found Catherine once. He inclined his head, neither intimate nor distant. She returned the acknowledgement. The first course passed beneath formal conversation. The second produced questions about the lifeboat shed, training expenses, and the cost of maintaining ropes through winter. Bramwell answered plainly. Catherine watched Tobias Sedgwick at the far end of the table. He spoke easily with merchants, yet his attention returned to Mrs. Dane whenever she answered a question. Edwin Rooke sat 2 places beyond him with a warehouse ledger beside his plate. His pale eyes moved often toward the service door. Millicent asked whether the false signal had caused needless alarm. A man nearly drowned, Bramwell replied. I do not consider that needless. Tobias lifted his wineglass. Coloured glass proves only that someone owned coloured glass. Catherine met his gaze. A rare cobalt lens ordered through the Rowley account and collected by your clerk proves more than ownership. Conversation thinned around them. Millicent set down her fork. My father's estate office pays hundreds of invoices. That is why no responsible person has accused your father, Catherine said. Edwin's mouth tightened. Mr. Pike remembers what suits him. Bramwell replied, he remembers your signature. A footman entered and murmured to Edwin. Edwin rose. One of the delivery horses has cast a shoe. I must see that the cart does not block the service lane. Tobias glanced at him. Be quick. Edwin bowed and left through the green baize door. Catherine marked the time by the mantel clock. Shortly after 9. Dinner ended with the subscription total exceeding expectation. Guests moved into the saloon, where the ledger remained open and the vicar announced the first stage of the lifeboat fund complete. Applause followed. It was warm, respectable, and brief. Mrs. Dane stood near the windows while Bramwell spoke quietly with 2 merchants. Tobias approached her. Your younger son was absent from the night list yesterday. Mrs. Dane's face lost colour. He was ill. Employment depends upon reliability. Ambrose turned from the subscription desk. Employment under a Caversham lease does not depend upon silence. Tobias bowed. I meant only that trade requires order, Your Grace. Then speak accurately. Several guests heard the rebuke. Mrs. Dane breathed again, though she did not thank Ambrose. Catherine was glad he did not ask her to. A quarter of an hour passed before Edwin returned. Mud darkened the edge of one boot, but his gloves were clean. The horse? Tobias asked. Settled. Edwin looked toward the clock, then toward the northern windows. Catherine saw it. Bramwell saw her see it. Neither spoke. Carriages began to be announced. Servants returned wraps from the music room. Catherine and Margaret waited near the curtain. Lady Pierce stood beside them, avoiding Catherine's eyes with the uneasy guilt of someone who had witnessed an injury and done nothing. Mary emerged carrying the dark green coat over both arms. Her breathing was shallow. Your counter, miss, the attendant said. Catherine surrendered the ivory token. Mary held out the coat without meeting her gaze. Catherine took it by the shoulders. Something shifted beneath the storm flap. The weight was wrong. Before she could examine it, a brown paper parcel slid from the inner fold and struck the polished floor. One end split open. A strip of cream lace spilled across the boards. The saloon fell silent. Tobias moved first. He bent without touching the parcel. French work, he said. Undeclared. Millicent pressed one hand to her breast. How extraordinary. Catherine did not look at her. She looked at Mary, whose lips had gone white. A merchant near the doorway muttered that the coat should be surrendered. A county woman drew her skirt away from Catherine as though suspicion might stain the hem. Lady Pierce took one involuntary step backward. That small movement hurt more than an accusation. Ambrose crossed the passage before whispers could harden into judgment. He stopped beside Catherine but did not seize the coat or stand in front of her. Miss Ellingford, he said, his voice carrying through the room, what do you require? The question altered the balance. Catherine kept the garment over her arm. Chief Officer Bramwell must receive the parcel. The music room must be closed. Every person who entered it must give a name and the time as nearly as possible. My coat remains with me. No one searches my person. Agreed. Ambrose turned to the household staff. No servant removes anything from this passage except at Mr. Bramwell's direction. Bramwell came forward. Lady Pierce, will you witness the opening in the music room? Her face changed with surprise. I will. Catherine heard the fear beneath the answer and the effort required to overcome it. Bramwell lifted the parcel by the unbroken paper and carried it behind the curtain. Catherine followed with her coat. Lady Pierce entered after them. One coastguardsman remained outside the closed door. Inside, Bramwell laid the parcel upon a bare table and unfolded the torn paper. Beneath it, the lace roll was bound tightly with blue cord. Catherine saw Mary's eyes in memory, fixed upon the coat at rehearsal. Lady Pierce drew a sharp breath. No one in the saloon saw that cord. They must not be told its colour, Bramwell said. Not yet. He wrapped the parcel in fresh paper, sealed it with wax, and entered the time and names in his station book. Lady Pierce signed beneath Catherine's name. Did you know this was in your coat? Bramwell asked. No, did you place it there? No, who handled the coat after you surrendered it? The household attendant received it. Miss Noakes carried it behind the curtain. Lady Pierce looked toward the door. Then Mary must be questioned. They returned to the passage. Mary had begun to tremble. Millicent moved to her side before Bramwell reached her. My maid is unwell. She must give an account, Bramwell said. She can give it tomorrow. She's scarcely able to stand. Catherine saw Mary look toward her. Terror filled the maid's face, not guilt alone. Millicent closed one gloved hand around Mary's arm. Come. Bramwell could not drag a frightened lady's maid before half the county without creating the very spectacle Millicent wanted. She is not to leave Falconhurst, he said. Millicent's smile returned. Naturally. Tobias looked at Catherine's coat. The lace resembles cargo missing from the Rowley warehouse. When was it reported missing? Catherine asked. This afternoon. Yet you informed neither Bramwell nor his Grace before dinner. Tobias's expression hardened. The inventory required confirmation. Catherine faced the watching guests. What smuggler carries undeclared lace into the most crowded room in Dorset, hides it inside her own coat, and waits for servants to display it before witnesses? No one answered. Lady Pierce moved back to Catherine's side. The gesture was small, but everyone saw it. Ambrose did not declare Catherine innocent without evidence. He did something more useful. Miss Ellingford attended as Chief Officer Bramwell's advisor and my mother's guest, he said. Suspicion will not be treated as fact in this house. Before the room could settle, the outer doors burst open. A groom stumbled into the hall, breathless and streaked with soot. Your Grace, he said. There's fire on the headland. Edwin Rook was nowhere in the room. Beyond the northern windows, an orange glow began to stain the sky. The orange glow above the northern headland spread before the first carriage could be brought around. Ambrose ordered the Falconhurst pumps, water carts, sand barrels, and every available horse sent toward the cliff road. Chief Officer Bramwell placed the sealed lace parcel inside his locked dispatch chest and assigned one coastguardsman to carry it directly to the station strongbarks. Catherine watched the officer leave with the parcel beneath his coat. Her dark green walking coat remained folded over her arm. No one touched it again. Mrs. Margaret Ellingford insisted upon accompanying Catherine as far as the Coast Guard station, where women from the village were already preparing blankets, hot drinks, and dry cloths for the men on the headland. From the quay, the abandoned tower burned like a lantern with no glass. Flames moved through its wooden lining and climbed the remains of the inner frame, while the stone walls held black against the sky. The wind is carrying sparks inland, Bramwell said. We must keep them from the gorse. Ambrose mounted without waiting for a groom. Before turning his horse, he looked at Catherine. Stay here. The words carried the force of habit. He saw her expression and corrected himself at once. Please. The cliff path is unsafe in darkness, and Bramwell needs the quay kept clear. Catherine might have resisted a command. She did not resist a sound reason. I'll remain until daylight. Ambrose inclined his head and rode after the water carts. The fire took nearly 3 hours to contain. Men passed buckets from the estate cistern while others threw sand through the doorway. No one entered the tower while the wooden lining still fell in burning strips. The flames never reached the lower stonework, but part of the interior support collapsed inward, sending sparks through the open top. Catherine stood beside the station window and counted every returning figure. Edwin Rook was not among them. Tobias Sedgwick arrived from Falconhurst near midnight and claimed Edwin had gone home after settling the delivery horse. Bramwell asked which man had seen him leave. Tobias could name none. Ambrose returned shortly before dawn with soot across one cheek and the sleeve of his coat darkened by water. He spoke first to Bramwell. "No one is missing from the fire party. 2 men have scorched gloves and some smoke in their lungs, nothing more. They will rest before they work again," Bramwell said. "Agreed." Ambrose's gaze moved to Catherine. She still wore the green coat, though one hand held the storm flap closed as if the fabric itself had become uncertain. He did not comment upon it. "The site remains under Coast Guard authority," Bramwell said. "No one enters before I inspect it. You will have every man and tool you require." At first light, Bramwell permitted a small party to approach the tower. Catherine went with him, Ambrose, and 2 coastguardsmen. Mrs. Ellingford followed in the estate carriage and remained near the lower gate with a maid. Tobias waited beside the cliff road in an immaculate coat. "A regrettable accident," he said. Bramwell looked toward the blackened doorway. "We have not called it an accident." The wooden lining had been destroyed. Charred boards lay across the floor, and the fresh soot Catherine had studied days earlier had disappeared beneath a greater stain. Loose tarred fibers had burned away. The stone walls, however, remained sound. Along the lower north wall, where the fire had scorched but not broken the masonry, Catherine saw 3 straight cuts around the edge of a rectangular stone. She crouched without touching them. "These marks were made before the fire," she said. "Soot has settled inside the older cuts." Bramwell knelt beside her. "A concealed panel. Or the beginning of one." He marked the position in his notebook and ordered the wall left untouched until proper witnesses and tools could be brought. Near the rear opening, one coastguardsman found a small brass cap half buried beneath wet ash. Bramwell lifted it with the point of a clean knife and placed it upon folded paper. The cap bore a stamped mark beneath the soot. R17. Tobias leaned closer. "A warehouse inventory number." "Which warehouse?" Bramwell asked. Tobias's answer came too slowly. "Possibly number 3. "The same warehouse where Mr. Rook claimed a lantern leaked," Catherine said. Tobias's mouth tightened. Bramwell sent one officer to fetch the oil register from the Rowley warehouse office. The man returned an hour later with the relevant book. Entry Art 17 identified a 2-gallon loading can issued to Edwin Rook for night work. The final signature was dated the previous afternoon. Tobias glanced at the register. "A cap can be stolen." "Yes," Bramwell said. "Which is why this is a clue, not a conviction." Catherine saw Ambrose absorb the distinction. He no longer mistook authority for certainty. Bramwell folded the cap inside the marked paper and sealed it. "Where is Rook?" "At his lodgings, I assume," Tobias replied. "You assumed wrongly. My officer found the room empty." Bramwell closed the register. "His landlady has not seen him since yesterday morning." Tobias gave a short breath. "Then perhaps he fled because your inquiry frightened him. Or because he set a fire." Ambrose's voice remained quiet. "Either possibility requires finding him." Tobias turned toward the Duke. "Your Grace, unrestricted inspection of warehouse records will alarm merchants and damage the Rowley lease. A false signal, planted contraband, and a burning tower should alarm them more." Ambrose faced the estate steward. "Open every Cliff Path record, boat list, night roster, key issue, and warehouse delivery ledger to Bramwell. Suspend all Rowley representatives from the North Road, Tower, Inlet, and Estate Boathouse until further notice." "The lease grants operational privacy," Tobias said. "It does not grant concealment of smuggling or arson." Ambrose's expression did not change. "You will comply." By the 23rd of October, the fire had become the county's favorite explanation for whatever prejudice each person already possessed. A local news sheet described Catherine as the naval officer's eccentric daughter whose knowledge of secret signals had become an object of official interest. It did not accuse her directly. It did not need to. A respectable widow who had promised a morning call sent word that her headache prevented the visit. Catherine understood the message. She laid the paper beneath the coal scuttle and turned toward the chair where her coat rested. The landlady's housemaid entered with a soft brush. "Shall I clean the ash from the hem, miss?" "No," the answer came too sharply. The girl stopped. Catherine closed her eyes for one breath. "Forgive me. You have done nothing wrong." "Of course, miss." The maid withdrew. Catherine looked at the coat. The parcel was gone. Bramwell had sealed it. The lace could no longer fall from the storm flap. Yet when Catherine reached for the wool, her hand stopped before touching it. Someone had used a private fold in her own garment to turn dignity into guilt. The coat still belonged to her. Her body did not yet believe it. Ambrose arrived that afternoon with Bramwell's report. Mrs. Ellingford received him in the morning room and remained beside the tea table with the door open. "Edwin has not returned to his lodgings or the warehouses," he said. "Bramwell has sent descriptions toward Dorchester and Weymouth. My men are checking the lesser roads, but they have been told not to approach him as though guilt were already proved." Catherine stood near the window. "The Alcan Cap places his equipment at the tower. It places equipment issued to him there. You have learned caution. At cost." His attention moved toward the coat upon the chair. "You have not worn it since the fire." "I wore it that night." "Not since." Catherine touched the repaired cuff. "Someone used it as a hiding place. I know that is not the same as losing it, but it no longer feels entirely mine." The admission left her more exposed than the public accusation had done. Ambrose took one step nearer, then stopped. "May I hold you?" Catherine looked at him. He offered no certainty that she would agree and no suggestion that comfort would purchase forgiveness. She crossed the room herself. His arms closed around her with deliberate gentleness. Catherine rested her forehead against his shoulder and allowed herself, for several breaths, not to be composed. Then she lifted her arms and held him in return. Ambrose exhaled as though her answer had reached a place words could not. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "For Falconhurst. For making it easier for others to believe your dignity could be negotiated." Catherine did not tell him the wound was gone. "Your apology is becoming true because your behavior is changing." He let her choose when to step back. Before sunset, a messenger arrived from an isolated cottage west of the headland. The folded note was addressed to Catherine in an unsteady hand. Its writer identified himself as Samuel Vane, retired keeper of the old signal tower. He had heard of the fire and wished to speak before age or fear silenced him again. The final line named the man who had first opened the North Inlet under lawful authority. The late Duke of Norchester. Samuel Vane lived in a low stone cottage west of the headland, where the land dipped enough to break the worst of the coastal wind. Catherine went there on the 25th of October with Mrs. Margaret Ellingford, Chief Officer Bramwell, and Ambrose. The retired signal keeper received them beside a small fire, wrapped in a brown shawl despite the warmth of the room. Age had bent his shoulders but not dulled his eyes. He looked first at Catherine. "You're Commander Ellingford's daughter." "I am." He understood signals. More important, he understood why men misuse them. Vane motioned toward the chairs. Bramwell remained near the door with his notebook closed. Margaret sat beside Catherine. Ambrose chose the chair farthest from the old man, as though rank might press less heavily from a distance. Vane folded both hands over the head of his walking stick. The tower was not always abandoned. During the wars, we used it to guide naval stores into the North Inlet when the public harbour was watched or overcrowded. The late Duke signed a warrant in 1816. It allowed emergency landings on Caversham ground. Catherine felt Ambrose become still. "Only naval landings?" she asked. "Naval stores, wounded men, dispatch vessels. Nothing private. Nothing for profit." Vane coughed into a handkerchief and waited until his breathing steadied. "When peace returned, the tower should have been closed properly. The warrant should have been cancelled. Every key should have been recovered. They were not. Bramwell opened his notebook. Who knew of the warrant? The late Duke. His steward. Me. Later, perhaps others. Mr. Sedgwick came to me years ago asking whether old landing rights survived a change in trade. What did you tell him? Enough to make an honest man cautious and a dishonest man clever. Vane looked toward Ambrose. I never held the original. It belonged in the Falconhurst archive. Catherine turned. Ambrose's face revealed almost nothing, but she recognized the silence now. It was the same silence she had sensed in the morning room on the 18th. The same divided attention behind his eyes when she asked whether Bramwell knew everything. Have you found it? She asked. Margaret's gaze sharpened. Bramwell lowered his pencil. Ambrose did not evade her. Yes. The word entered the room like a door closing. Catherine's disappointment did not arrive suddenly. It settled into place with terrible order, fitting itself around every pause of the past 10 days. When? On the 15th. 10 days ago. Yes. Did you know what it meant? Ambrose looked at her directly. I sought a legal opinion that afternoon. The solicitor confirmed by the 17th that the warrant had no present force. Catherine's voice remained steady. Then you had 2 days of legitimate caution. Yes. And 8 days of what? The fire shifted behind Vane. Ambrose did not search for gentler language. Cowardice. Bramwell's expression changed by only a fraction. Margaret did not move at all. I told myself I needed to examine the lease, Ambrose continued. I told myself disclosure before the dinner might scatter the men we were watching. I told myself a duke had a duty to understand the damage before releasing it. But that was not the truth. No, his jaw tightened. The truth was that I feared the county would mistake negligence for complicity. I feared what the warrant would do to the Caversham name. And I feared what you would think when you learned my house had given their deception the appearance of inherited authority. Catherine rose. Ambrose stood as well. He extended one hand before stopping himself. She looked at it and did not take it. The open palm that had once felt like restraint now looked like a bridge built over knowledge he had chosen to keep beneath the water. He lowered it at once. You let me stand in your house and ask whether Bramwell knew everything, she said. You knew the answer was no. Yes. You allowed me to investigate why men believed the inlet protected by ducal authority while the document sat beneath your key. Yes. You decided the truth belonged to you first. Ambrose accepted the charge without lifting his chin. I did. You repeated the same insult in another form. Pain crossed his face. Catherine did not soften the words. At Falconhurst, you decided which woman could occupy a role. Here, you decided which truth I was permitted to know. In both cases, you placed your judgment above my consent. You are right. Do not agree because agreement sounds humble. I am not. His voice roughened. I agree because there is no honest defense. Catherine turned toward Bramwell. I will continue assisting your inquiry. I expected nothing less, he said. She looked back at Ambrose. I will not continue discussing this matter with you privately. I will not accept comfort from you while you are still deciding whether truth is safe enough to release. I understand. Do not call it understanding if you mean obedience. Then I will say only that I will respect the boundary. That answer was better, but it did not restore what had been damaged. Bramwell closed his notebook. The original warrant must enter official custody today. It will, Ambrose said. The 1847 memorandum and Edwin Rook's key receipt as well. All three. They left Vane's cottage before noon. Ambrose rode directly to Falconhurst. Catherine returned to the Coast Guard station with Bramwell and Margaret. She did not see him again until late afternoon, when he entered Bramwell's office carrying a locked dispatch case without servants or estate officers. Mr. Pell followed with the archive register. Ambrose placed the case on the desk and unlocked it. Inside lay the original 1816 warrant, the 1847 memorandum recording Tobias's inquiry into historic landing rights, and Edwin Rooke signed receipt for a Falconhurst pattern key. Bramwell examined each document, noted its condition, and prepared a formal receipt. "The original remains with me until the magistrate directs otherwise," he said. "The certified copy may remain in the Falconhurst archive." Agreed. Ambrose signed a written statement declaring that he had discovered the warrant on the 15th of October, obtained a legal opinion by the 17th, and withheld disclosure until the 25th because he feared damage to House Caversham. He also stated that the warrant granted no authority for current private landings. "A certified notice will go to the county magistrate tonight," Bramwell said, "and to the customs officer at Weymouth tomorrow." Ambrose handed him the key to the dispatch case. "Use whatever records you require." Catherine stood beside the coastal chart. Ambrose did not approach her. When the formalities ended, he bowed to Margaret, then to Catherine. "Miss Ellingford." "Your Grace." He left without asking whether surrendering the documents had earned anything. That was the first action of his apology Catherine trusted completely. Over the next 2 days, she worked only through Bramwell. The evidence formed a tightening pattern. Nathan Pike's ledger tied Tobias to the blue lens and Edwin to the brass frame. Mrs. Dane's statement tied Edwin to night carts and the Rowley carriage to landing nights. The Wilkin cap placed equipment issued to Edwin at the Burn Tower. The warrant explained why frightened Labourse might believe the North Inlet operated beneath ducal protection. Yet the lens itself remained missing, and without it Tobias could still claim the shard came from some unrelated lamp. Catherine spread Bramwell's tide tables across the station desk. Mrs. Dane said the boats come when the water reaches the lower Black Stone. Bramwell leaned over the chart. That happened shortly after midnight on the 31st. And the next useful tide? Not for nearly 3 weeks. Catherine traced the route from the inlet to the tower. The fire destroyed the wooden lining, but not the lower stone wall. "We have marked the panel. Tobias knows that once you open it under witnesses, anything inside belongs to the inquiry. You believe the lens survived. If it did not, he has nothing to retrieve. If it did, he cannot leave it there." Bramwell considered her. "The Tower Road is watched. Then let him believe the watch has moved." She proposed a visible inspection at the South Quay on the night of the 31st. Uniformed men, lanterns, and carts would be placed where warehouse clerks could see them. 2 coastguardsmen would remain hidden near the tower. Bramwell would command. Ambrose's estate men would hold the lower path without approaching the cavity. Catherine would observe from the official party because she knew the likely sightline and signal equipment. "You will not stand alone on a cliff at midnight," Bramwell said. "I did not propose to." "Mrs. Ellingford will object." "Sensibly." Margaret, seated beside the stove, lifted her eyes from her knitting. "I object already." Catherine faced her. "Then come to the station and wait there with the carriage. I will remain with Bramwell and 2 officers." Margaret studied her for a long moment. "You will not leave the official party." "I will not." Bramwell approved the plan. Ambrose was told only what resources were required. He placed the lower gate, 2 estate men, fresh horses, and the boathouse at Bramwell's disposal. He did not ask Catherine to explain the plan privately. He did not claim the right to protect her by overruling her. On the night of the 31st, a bright line of Coast Guard lanterns moved deliberately toward the South Quay. Warehouse clerks watched from doorways. Tobias Sedgwick left the harbour office before 10. Near midnight, Catherine waited beside Bramwell and 2 coastguardsmen above the North Inlet. Ambrose and the estate men held the lower path out of sight. The Burn Tower stood black against a thin moon. For almost an hour, nothing moved. Then a shuttered lantern appeared beyond the gorse. A figure entered the ruined doorway, crossed the charred floor, and knelt before the marked stone in the north wall. Metal scraped softly against stone. The hidden panel began to open. The hidden panel moved outward by less than an inch before the figure paused to listen. Catherine stood behind the broken south wall with Chief Officer Bramwell and 2 coastguardsmen, every breath measured against the sound of wind through the ruined tower. The man inside raised his shuttered lantern. Its narrow beam crossed the charred stones and struck his face. Tobias Sedgwick. He set the lantern on the floor, drew the panel farther open, and reached into the cavity with both hands. Metal scraped against stone. When he withdrew, he held a brass shutter frame wrapped in coarse sacking. A thick cobalt bullseye lens remained fitted within it, except for one triangular break along the lower edge. Catherine felt Bramwell's attention shift toward her, but neither of them moved. Tobias lifted the frame closer to the light and inspected the broken place. His expression changed from concentration to fear. He knew the missing shard had survived. Bramwell stepped through the doorway. "Set it down, Mr. Sedgwick." Tobias turned so sharply that the frame struck the wall. He caught it before it fell. One coastguardsman entered from the rear opening while the other blocked the path toward the cliff. "You have no authority to search Caversham property in darkness," Tobias said. "I have authority to investigate an unlawful signal, suspected smuggling, and the destruction of evidence," Bramwell replied. "Set down the frame." Tobias looked toward the northern opening, then toward the rear path. "This is old warehouse equipment. Nothing more. Then you will have no difficulty surrendering it for examination." Catherine remained where Bramwell had ordered her, several paces beyond the doorway. Tobias saw her. A flash of hatred disturbed the cultivated calm he had carried through dinners and inquiries. "You planned this." "I observed the tide," she said. "You chose to come." Tobias lowered the frame as though obeying. Then he dropped the sacking, caught the shuttered lantern, and rushed through the rear opening. The coastguardsman moved to intercept him, but Tobias swerved into the gorse and descended toward the lower path. Bramwell did not send men blindly after him. He lifted a whistle and gave 2 short notes. A lantern opened below. Ambrose stepped from behind the lower gate with 2 estate men. He did not pursue Tobias uphill. He closed the gate across the narrow path and stood before it. Tobias stopped several yards away. "Move," he said. No, Ambrose's voice carried without force. "Chief Officer Bramwell requires you to return. This is Rowley business." It ceased to be private business when a fisherman nearly drowned. Tobias turned back toward the tower, but the 2 coastguardsmen had already reached the path behind him. There was no struggle. Bramwell took the lantern from his hand and ordered him detained. Tobias surrendered with a contemptuous breath, as though cooperation was still a choice he controlled. Inside the tower, Catherine watched Bramwell lift the brass frame by its outer edge. The lens was heavier than the shard had suggested, its cobalt surface dark in the lantern light. Repeated shutters remained attached on one side, their hinges blackened but intact. Fire had not reached the cavity deeply enough to destroy them. Bramwell wrapped the entire frame in the sacking without allowing anyone else to touch it. "The strong barks at the station," he told the senior coastguardsman. "You will carry it. Mr. Sedgwick will walk between the other officer and me." Catherine stepped outside. The thin moon had begun to sink. Near the lower road, one of Ambrose's estate men held a lantern over fresh wheel tracks pressed into the wet ground. Catherine crouched beside them without touching the mud. At regular intervals, a narrow cut appeared along the left rut. Mrs. Dane had described a chipped iron rim that left a notch at every turn. "The Rowley travelling carriage," Catherine said. Ambrose looked toward the road leading east. "It was not here when we took our positions." "Then someone came after Tobias entered the tower," Bramwell replied. The tracks approached from the direction of Falconhurst's lower road, stopped beneath the headland, and turned back. No carriage waited nearby. Bramwell posted an estate man to guard the marks until daylight. "Do not follow," he ordered. "We have one prisoner and one piece of evidence. We will not lose either by chasing a carriage through darkness." Tobias gave a short laugh. "You have an old lamp and muddy ground. Catherine looked at him. And you opened a concealed wall to retrieve both. He said nothing more. They reached the Coast Guard station shortly before 2 in the morning. Mrs. Ellingford was waiting beside the stove, knitting untouched in her lap. She rose when Catherine entered, then stopped herself from embracing her before witnesses. You remained with the official party. I did. Margaret looked toward Bramwell. And the man? Detained. Uninjured. Tobias was placed in the interview room under guard while Bramwell prepared the evidence table. The cobalt shard came from the station strongbox in its original marked paper. The brass frame remained inside the sacking until Nathan Pike could be summoned, but Bramwell allowed a preliminary comparison before witnesses. Ambrose, Catherine, Margaret, and 2 Coast Guardsmen stood present. Bramwell placed the lens flat upon a clean cloth. He unfolded the shard without lifting it from the paper, then aligned the curved edge with the missing section. The 2 pieces met. The star-shaped bubble extended across the fracture, 1 point trapped in the shard and the remaining points visible in the lens. No other fragment could have completed that flaw. Catherine released a breath she had not known she held. Bramwell examined the brass rim and found a small maker's stamp beneath one hinge. N. Pike, Weymouth. The glazier will confirm this formally, he said. Until then, the frame and shard returned to the strongbox. He separated them again, wrapped each in its marked covering, and locked them away. Tobias was brought into the office after the evidence had been secured. He looked first at Ambrose, then at Catherine. Lady Millicent knew nothing about that lens. Bramwell had not mentioned her name. Silence settled across the room. I did not ask whether she did, he said. Tobias's jaw tightened. Her family account was used by clerks. That proves nothing. You ordered the lens, Bramwell replied. Edwin Rook collected the frame. You retrieved it from a concealed cavity after midnight. Because I feared Rook had hidden stolen warehouse property there. Then why did you run? Tobias looked toward the closed strongbox. Because this inquiry has been conducted to disgrace respectable people. Catherine saw the shape of his loyalty. It was not affection. It was calculation. Protecting Millicent protected the Rowley name, the lease, and perhaps whatever arrangement still promised him rescue. Bramwell sent him under guard to the magistrate's custody before dawn. Edwin Rook remained missing. The carriage tracks remained unexplained. Catherine and Margaret left the station as the sky began to pale above the harbour. Ambrose walked with them to the lodging house, keeping a respectful distance. At the gate, Margaret went inside to wake the landlady and leave the door open. Catherine remained beneath the small porch lamp. Ambrose stopped 1 step below her. Weariness had stripped the last formality from his face. You were right about the tide, he said. Bramwell approved the plan. You conceived it. And Tobias chose to enter the tower. Ambrose looked toward her hands. I have admired your courage from the night you held the white lamp. I admire your judgment more now than I know how to say. Catherine's heart answered before she could prevent it. The embrace in the morning room still lived in her body. So did the 10 days of silence. Both truths belong to him. Do not say what you cannot yet support with trust, she said. Then I will ask only what I can ask honestly. He lifted his eyes. May I kiss you? The tenderness of the question hurt because part of her wanted to say yes. Catherine stepped closer, not enough to touch. Not yet. Ambrose did not hide the disappointment. He also did not challenge her. Because of the warrant. Because truth cannot arrive only after it becomes impossible to conceal. She held his gaze. I believe you regret what you did. I do not yet know whether you have changed enough to choose truth before fear. That is fair. It is not punishment. I know. Do you? Yes. His voice was quiet. You are not withholding something that belongs to me. Catherine's throat tightened. That answer came from the man she had hoped he might become, not the man he had been. She inclined her head. Good night, Your Grace. Good morning, Miss Ellingford. Ambrose stepped back and allowed her to enter. Margaret was crossing the hall when a faint knock sounded at the rear door. The landlady called from above that no delivery should come at such an hour. Catherine took the lamp and opened the door with Margaret beside her. Mary Noakes stood on the step, soaked through, one shoe torn and mud covering the hem of her dress. Her face was grey with exhaustion. She caught the door frame before her knees failed. Miss Ellingford, she whispered. Lady Millicent means to leave England before dawn. Mary Noakes remained upright only long enough for Catherine and Margaret to bring her inside. The landlady heated water while Margaret found a dry nightdress and wool stockings. Catherine removed Mary's torn shoe, wrapped her chilled feet, and placed warm broth in her hands before asking a single question. Mary tried to speak twice, but her teeth shook too violently. "You'll rest first," Catherine said. "No one will take a statement while you can scarcely breathe. She'll know I've gone. Lady Millicent does not know where you are." Catherine did not promise safety she could not guarantee. "Chief Officer Bramwell will be told before anyone else." Bramwell arrived within the hour and posted a coastguardsman outside the lodging house. He listened only long enough to learn that Millicent's planned escape was tied to the lifeboat launch on the 6th of November, not to that morning. The public gathering would draw attention toward the quay while a hired cutter waited beyond the northern inlet before first light. Mary had fled early because Millicent had ordered her to pack travelling cases and burn several letters. Bramwell sent immediate notices to the magistrate, the customs officer at Weymouth, and the coastal stations. Mary slept through most of the next day under Margaret's supervision. On the 3rd of November, dressed in borrowed brown wool and seated near the morning-room fire, she gave her formal account with Bramwell, Catherine, Margaret, and a respectable widow from the parish present. "Lady Millicent gave me the parcel on the afternoon of the dinner," Mary said. Her hands remained clasped so tightly that the knuckles showed white. It was already wrapped in brown paper. She told me to place it beneath the storm flap of Miss Ellingford's coat after the other wraps were carried in. Bramwell's pencil moved across the page. "Did you know what it contained?" "French lace." Mr. Sedgwick brought the roll from a larger bale. Lady Millicent tied it with blue cord before wrapping it. Catherine watched Mary's face. "Did anyone in the saloon see the cord?" "No, miss. It was beneath the paper." Lady Millicent said the paper must tear enough to show the lace, but not the cord. "Why?" She said one hidden detail would prove whether anyone opened it privately. Bramwell looked up. The blue cord had become more than packaging. It was a fact Millicent believed she controlled. "What did she threaten you with?" Catherine asked. Mary lowered her eyes. "My character. She said no household in England would take me if I refused. My mother is dead. My younger sister depends upon what I send her." "That explains the pressure," Catherine said. "It does not erase what you did." Mary's face crumpled, but she nodded. "I know. Continue." Mary described Edwin Rook's role. He had carried lamp oil from warehouse number 3, used his unreturned estate key, and set the fire while the dinner guests were still inside Falconhurst. Tobias had ordered the tower destroyed because Bramwell's inspections were drawing too near the hidden stone panel. After Tobias disappeared from the dinner, Edwin had returned by the lower road and later fled to an empty shepherd's hut. "He still has another lamp," Mary said. "A white one with shutters." Lady Millicent told him to give 3 short flashes and 1 long when the inlet was clear. "When?" Bramwell asked. "Before the lifeboat launch. The boats and crowd will be at the public harbour. Mr. Rook will signal from the northern cliff. A yawl will bring the last cargo, and the cutter will take Lady Millicent away once the goods are landed. Why risk one final cargo? The Denswick creditors will not wait." Lady Millicent said the lace and spirits would pay enough to keep them quiet until she married his grace. Catherine felt no triumph. Millicent had built her future upon the belief that Ambrose's title could conceal any source of wealth. "Does Tobias know she intends to leave England?" Bramwell asked. He knows about the cutter, but he believes it is meant to carry them both. Mary swallowed. It isn't. Lady Millicent packed only her own cases and mine. She said Mr. Sedgwick had become a danger. Bramwell finished the statement and read it aloud. Mary corrected one time and added the location of the shepherd's hut. Then she signed. Catherine arranged for her to be taken under escort to respectable lodging near the vicar's house. Will you tell them I'm innocent? Mary asked. No, Catherine said. I will tell them you confessed before the final landing and helped prevent it. The rest belongs to the magistrate. Mary accepted the answer because it was honest. That afternoon, Bramwell carried Mary's statement, the cutter booking, and an inventory of packed Rowley cases to the magistrate's rooms. Tobias was brought in under guard. At first, he called Mary a frightened liar. Then Bramwell placed the cutter agreement before him. Only Lady Millicent's name appeared upon it. The 2 cabins had been reserved for Millicent and a maid. Tobias read the paper twice. She intended to leave me. She intended you to remain where the law could find you, Bramwell said. Tobias's loyalty ended where abandonment began. He did not become remorseful. He became practical. Before the magistrate, he signed a statement confirming that Millicent had authorized the false signals, financed the cargoes through the Rowley account, approved the use of Catherine's coat, and ordered the final escape. He named Edwin as the man who had operated the lamps and burned the tower. On the 5th of November, Ambrose summoned the parish committee, harbour representatives, Sir Alton and Lady Pierce, the Dowager Duchess, and several county witnesses to Falconhurst. Catherine attended beside Margaret, not as his guest but as Bramwell's adviser. Ambrose stood at the end of the long table with the certified copy of the 1816 warrant before him. This house failed in its duty, he said. The warrant authorized wartime naval landings. It never authorized private trade. Yet House Caversham failed to recover keys, failed to close the old route, and allowed men to trade upon the appearance of ducal permission. No one moved. Ambrose continued. I found the original on the 15th of October. I sought legal advice for 2 days. By the 17th, I knew it had no present force. I then concealed it for 8 more days because I feared scandal. That was not caution. It was cowardice. Sir Alton lowered his eyes. Lady Pierce looked toward Catherine. Ambrose placed the certified copy in Bramwell's hands. The original remains in official custody. I have withdrawn from any private decision concerning the Rowley lease inquiry. Chief Officer Bramwell and the magistrate will proceed without interference from me. He gained nothing by the confession that Catherine had not already learned. That was why it mattered. He made it before knowing whether she would ever return to him. Bramwell then announced that the lifeboat launch would proceed at first light on the 6th because the favourable tide lasted only a short interval. Coast Guard patrols would be hidden beyond the public quay. Falconhurst would provide horses, lamps, access, and men, but Bramwell would command. Edwin Rooke remained at large. The white shutter lamp had not been recovered. After the committee dispersed, Catherine paused in the conservatory while Margaret remained in the adjoining morning room with the connecting door open. Ambrose entered and stopped several feet away. I do not ask you to forget what I did, he said. I ask for the chance to become a man who no longer believes fear gives him ownership of truth. Catherine looked at him. His public confession had cost him authority, reputation, and the protection of ambiguity. He had paid that cost without asking her to stand beside him. Trust is returning, she said. It has not returned completely. I know. And tomorrow's truth must stand in daylight. It will. He did not move closer. Catherine did. She crossed the remaining distance until only a breath separated them. Ambrose's voice lowered. May I kiss you? Yes. His hand rose slowly to her cheek. The kiss was gentle, brief, and unmistakably answered. Catherine touched his coat and chose not to step away at once. When she did, Ambrose released her without reluctance becoming pressure. From the corridor came Bramwell's voice. A rider had found the shepherd's hut empty. Edwin was still free, and somewhere along the northern cliff, the second shuttered lamp was waiting for dawn. Before dawn on the 6th of November, St. Elwin's Quay filled beneath a sky only beginning to pale. The lifeboat launch had been fixed for first light because the favourable tide would hold for less than an hour, and Bramwell had used that practical necessity to gather the county without warning the smugglers. Fishermen stood beside merchants. Parish committee members crowded near the new boat. Sir Alton and Lady Pierce waited with the Dowager Duchess beneath the harbour awning. Mrs. Dane remained near her sons. Ambrose stood among them in a dark greatcoat, not at the head of the quay but beside the Falconhurst steward, where he could provide men and horses without pretending to command the coast guard. Catherine arrived with Margaret in the dark green coat. The repaired cuff lay smooth against her wrist. The mismatched horn button was fastened firmly beneath her throat. Across the quay, Lady Millicent Rowley descended from the family travelling carriage in a heavy cloak. One rear wheel turned with a visible chip in its iron rim. Each revolution left a narrow notch in the damp road. Catherine saw Bramwell see it. Neither looked at Millicent. "You are determined to make a spectacle of this inquiry," Millicent said as Catherine approached. "The tide determined the hour," Catherine replied. "The inquiry will determine the rest." Millicent's smile did not reach her eyes. Behind her carriage, 2 travelling cases had been strapped beneath a waterproof cover. A hired driver held the reins. No Rowley servant stood beside him except a footman Catherine did not recognize. The harbour bell sounded once. Bramwell raised his hand toward the lifeboat crew. Then, high above the northern cliff, a white light appeared. It vanished. Appeared again. Vanished. A third short flash cut through the grey. After a pause came one long, steady beam. Catherine's body knew the pattern before thought formed. "That is not the launch signal," she said. Bramwell lowered his hand. 3 short. 1 long. Mary's account. He turned to the senior coastguardsman. "Hold the boat. Begin the northern patrol." The public crew continued checking ropes as though nothing had changed. Hidden beyond the quay, Coast Guard men moved toward the inlet. Catherine, Bramwell, and 2 officers entered the waiting pony cart and took the cliff road. Ambrose stepped forward only far enough to hear Bramwell's instruction. "Keep the lower estate gate closed. No one passes without my order." "Understood," Ambrose said. He did not ask Catherine to remain. He met her eyes once. The fear in his face was honest, but he did not use it as authority. "Come back," he said quietly. "That is my intention." The cart stopped below the burn tower. The white shutter lamp flashed again from the northern opening. Bramwell led the ascent. Catherine remained between the 2 coastguardsmen. Inside the blackened stone shell, Edwin Rooke stood beside a portable lamp fixed with repeated shutters. He turned when Bramwell entered. "Step away from it," Bramwell ordered. Edwin seized the handle and ran through the rear opening. He reached the path, saw an officer below, and tried to cut across the gorse. One of the coastguardsmen intercepted him before he reached the cliff turn. Edwin stopped rather than risk the edge. Beneath his coat they found a Falconhurst pattern key and the handle of a second oil can stamped with the Rowley warehouse mark. The shuttered white lamp remained inside the tower. "The fire did not frighten you away for long," Catherine said. Edwin's pale eyes fixed upon her. "You don't know what you've brought down upon the men who work these roads." "You used those men as cover," she replied. "Do not call that protection." Bramwell ordered Edwin taken to the lower path under guard. Then he looked through the northern opening. A dark yawl had already committed to the inlet, its sail reduced as it followed the false signal. "It is too far inside to turn safely without guidance," he said. Catherine moved to the lamp. "Then it needs the lawful one." Bramwell nodded. She opened the clear lens, extinguished the false shutter pattern, and lit a steady white beam toward the safe channel. The yawl shifted. From the western side of the inlet, a Coast Guard cutter emerged. A patrol boat closed from the east. No shot was fired. No vessel struck another. The smuggling yawl slowed between them, trapped by tide, stone, and the truth of the light. When Catherine returned to the quay, the first edge of sun had risen above the roofs. The seized yawl lay beneath Coast Guard with bales of French lace and casks of spirits stacked openly upon the stones. Edwin stood beside Tobias Sedgwick under magistrate escort. Tobias's statement had already been signed. He had not been brought to invent a confession before the crowd, only to confirm what he had given under authority. Lady Millicent remained near her carriage, one gloved hand resting on the door. Her travelling cases were still strapped behind it. Bramwell stepped onto the harbour platform. The final cargo has been seized. The inquiry will now place certain facts before the committee and the magistrate's representatives. He began with the cargo. The lace recovered from the yawl matched the kind Mary had described. One roll bore a freshly cut edge. Bramwell then produced the sealed parcel taken from Catherine's coat and opened it before Lady Pierce, who stood beside him as the earlier witness. The planted roll matched the cut edge and selvage of the bale from the yawl. Beneath the brown paper, the blue cord remained tied around it. Lady Pierce faced the assembled guests. The cord was not visible in the saloon. I saw it only after Chief Officer Bramwell opened the parcel in the closed music room. Millicent's composure broke by a fraction. The blue cord was beneath the paper, she said. No one should have opened it without authority. Silence spread across the quay. Bramwell turned toward her. The colour and position of that cord were never made public. Millicent's hand left the carriage door. Mary told me. Mary states that you tied it yourself. Bramwell held up the magistrate's copy of her testimony. She also identifies Mr. Rooke as the man who burned the tower and kept the second signal lamp. The officer beside Edwin raised the Falconhurst key and marked oil confound upon him. Edwin looked toward Tobias. Tobias gave him nothing. Bramwell then produced Tobias's signed statement. Under the magistrate's eye, Tobias confirmed his signature. Lady Millicent authorized the cargoes, the false signals, and the use of Miss Ellingford's coat, he said. His voice contained no repentance. She arranged the cutter for herself. She meant to leave the rest of us behind. Millicent turned toward the road. The hired driver had already stepped away from the carriage at Bramwell's order. Two coastguardsmen closed the distance without touching her until the magistrate's clerk formally required her to remain. The Earl of Denswick's warehouse lease was suspended pending legal proceedings. Tobias and Edwin were named as its agents, not its owners. Ambrose stepped onto the platform only after Bramwell had finished. He faced Sir Alton, Lady Pierce, the harbour families, the servants, and the woman he had once humiliated before witnesses. I said I could find 100 women like Catherine Ellingford. His voice carried across the quay. I was wrong before I had finished the sentence. Suitability may be repeated. Courage cannot. Judgment cannot. A human soul cannot. Catherine did not look away. House Caversham failed to recover keys, failed to close an unlawful route, and allowed its name to shelter men who profited from fear. I also concealed the old warrant for 10 days. 2 days were spent seeking legal advice. The remaining 8 were spent protecting my reputation. There is no honourable word for that choice. Lady Pierce stepped down from the awning and came to Catherine's side. When the lace fell, Miss Ellingford asked for order while the rest of us offered suspicion. The Dowager Duchess joined them without speaking. Her presence did not replace Catherine's voice. It strengthened the space in which Catherine could use it. The laborious must not be punished together with the men who directed them, Catherine said. Mrs. Dane's sons must not lose their livelihood because they helped reveal the truth. Falconhurst should advance 1 month's wages while the lease is transferred. The lifeboat fund should receive the lawful portion of any forfeited security. Mary Noakes's record must show both the wrong she committed and the testimony that prevented this final landing. Bramwell looked toward the committee. The vicar and harbour representatives agreed. Ambrose said only, Falconhurst will honour the undertaking. He did not present justice as a gift from himself. When the crowd began to disperse and the seized goods passed into official custody, Catherine walked toward the end of the quay. The steady white lamp still shone from the tower above the inlet. Ambrose stopped beside her. "I love you," he said. There was no title, proposal, or expectation attached to the words. Catherine looked at the man who had once treated her as an office and had now placed his failure before the same world whose approval he had feared. "I love you too." His breath caught. Catherine continued, "But I will never become a position you fill. I do not ask you to." "What do you ask?" "Permission to know you honestly. Permission to court you without presuming the answer." Catherine stepped into his arms. The embrace was firm, reciprocal, and free of urgency. When she drew back, Ambrose waited. "You may make a formal morning call," she said. "At 10. A quiet smile reached his face. "I'll be punctual." Above them, the false signal was gone. The clear light remained. By the spring assizes of 1850, the false blue lens no longer belonged to rumour, fear, or Falconhurst. It rested in official custody with the triangular shard fitted beside it, the star-shaped flaw crossing the break exactly as Nathan Pike had testified. The brass shutter frame, the 1816 warrant, Edwin Rook's key receipt, Tobias Sedgwick's signed statement, Mary Noakes's confession, and the sealed lace parcel had all passed before the court. Tobias and Edwin were convicted of smuggling conspiracy, revenue fraud, and offences connected to the burning of the tower. Lady Millicent Rowley was convicted of conspiracy, planting contraband, and attempting to escape before the final seizure. Each received a term of imprisonment. The Earl of Denswick's estate lost the Falconhurst warehouse lease and paid penalties that consumed what remained of its commercial security. The judgment did not restore every injured reputation at once, but it removed the lie beneath them. Mary received leniency because she confessed before the final landing and gave evidence that prevented it. No one called her innocent. Chief Officer Bramwell provided an official statement recording both her wrongdoing and her cooperation. Catherine arranged a private introduction to a respectable dressmaker in Dorchester, who agreed to employ Mary under supervision. Mrs. and Dane Sons remained at the harbour under the independent lease awarded after the inquiry. Falconhurst advanced the promised month of wages during the transfer, and the parish committee began publishing the lifeboat accounts at regular meetings. Ambrose did not place his name above the reports. He attended when invited, answered questions when required, and allowed the work to stand without turning responsibility into generosity. His first formal call upon Catherine had occurred at 10 o'clock exactly on the morning after the seizure. He arrived with flowers for Margaret rather than Catherine and stayed the proper half hour. The next week he returned with a book of coastal charts borrowed from the Falconhurst collection, though he asked Catherine before leaving it with her. Their courtship proceeded in deliberate increments. They walked with Margaret or the Dowager Duchess along the safer cliff roads. They dined at Falconhurst when other guests were present. When Ambrose went to London for parliamentary business, he wrote letters that contained no declarations Catherine was expected to answer in kind. He described debates, estate reforms, mistakes, and moments in which he had nearly acted from habit before choosing otherwise. Catherine replied when she wished. She continued advising Bramwell on coastal safety and helped the parish committee establish a lawful signal register for fishermen, pilots, and estate workers. Ambrose never treated that work as an ornament to his future household. By late May, the criminal cases had concluded and the new harbour lease had been signed. Catherine had not promised marriage. Ambrose had not asked for it. On a clear afternoon, he invited her, Margaret, and Bramwell to the Coast Guard lookout above St. Elwyn's Cove. Bramwell remained near the signal table while Margaret examined a basket of charts by the window. Ambrose placed a leather folder before Catherine. "These are not a proposal," he said. "Not yet." Catherine opened the folder. Inside lay a draft marriage settlement prepared by two solicitors, one representing Ambrose and one chosen independently by Catherine. Her annuity, personal income, and any property later acquired in her own right would remain protected. Nothing in the settlement placed her coastal work beneath ducal permission. Beneath the formal papers lay a separate written undertaking in Ambrose's hand. It stated that her private correspondence would remain private, that her committee service would continue by her own judgment, and that no household officer would claim authority over work she had accepted independently. Catherine read every line. "A solicitor cannot force affection," she said. "No or honesty. No or courage." Noah Ambrose stood across the table without reaching for her. "The papers protect what law can protect. The rest depends upon the man who signs them." Catherine closed the folder. "And what does that man promise?" "Not that I shall never fail." His answer came without hesitation. "I promise that when I fail, I will not use rank, silence, or reputation to hide it. I will tell you the truth before fear makes the decision for me." He drew a breath. "Catherine, I love you. I have loved your courage, your judgment, your restraint, and the part of you that refused to be softened into obedience. I do not ask you to become the duchess I once imagined. I ask whether you will marry me and remain entirely yourself." The room held the sound of the sea beyond the windows. Catherine looked at the man who had once offered her a position and now offered terms designed to protect her freedom from his own power. She allowed the silence to remain long enough that his hope became visible. Then she stood. "Yes." Ambrose's eyes closed for one brief second. "Yes? Yes, Ambrose. I will marry you." He did not touch her until she crossed the space between them. Catherine placed both hands against his coat and drew him down into a kiss she had chosen before he could ask. Margaret made a pointed sound near the charts. Bramwell looked toward the sea with professional dedication. Catherine smiled against Ambrose's mouth and stepped back only when she wished. They were married in July at the parish church after the required residence and by common license. Catherine entered beneath her own name, Miss Catherine Ellingford, with Margaret beside her and Bramwell among the witnesses. She became Duchess of Norchester only after speaking the vows. The Dowager Duchess wept without apology. Mrs. Dane stood with her sons near the aisle. Mary did not attend, but a letter arrived from Dorchester that morning saying she had completed 6 months of honest work. There was no announcement of an heir and no suggestion that marriage had completed Catherine more fully than truth had done. The wedding breakfast was generous but not excessive. Ambrose thanked the harbour families before the county guests and directed every public toast away from his title and toward the lifeboat crew, Bramwell's officers, and those who had spoken while afraid. Near dusk, Catherine changed into a travelling gown and put on the dark green walking coat. The repaired left cuff remained visible. The mismatched horn button still sat beneath her throat. Ambrose noticed it but made no comment until they reached the restored signal tower above the inlet. The wooden lining had been rebuilt in oak. The concealed cavity had been sealed in stone. A new lawful lamp stood within a brass frame made for steady white glass. The false cobalt lens remained in the magistrate's custody and would never shine from that tower again. Catherine moved toward the lamp while Ambrose opened the seaward shutter. Wind entered, cool and clean. Her horn button had loosened against the climb. Ambrose looked at it, then at her. He did not lift his hand. Catherine understood the silent question and nodded. His fingers fastened the darker button with careful attention. The small act carried no claim. Only permission. Catherine placed one hand upon the lamp mechanism. Ambrose stood beside the shutter. Together they lit the clear flame. A steady white beam reached across the evening water, marking the safe channel without deception. "I love you," Ambrose said. Catherine turned toward him. "I love you too." She drew him close and kissed him beneath the lawful light. When she faced the sea again, her hand remained on the lamp, her green coat moved in the wind, and the beam held steady over the darkening water.